Hi friends, welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. I'm Kenzie, and today I'll be reading a creepypasta from Reddit. This story comes from a user we have read a story from before, user Erucius. Paranormal Facilitator. When she opened the front door, her face was a study in relief. "Are you the paranormal investigator the agency sent out?" she asked, getting right to the point. She had once been a pretty woman, he had no doubt, but grief had aged her. She wore a simple pink dress with a sensible pair of black shoes poking from underneath the hem, and her chestnut hair was swept back into a messy braid. She looked like someone who has become used to living in a situation outside her control, determined but hopeful. He took off his hat, a tan Humphrey Bogart number, and smiled at her. "I am from the agency, but they thought your case might need something special. That's why they sent me." She showed him in and took his coat before leading him into the living room. She introduced her husband, Michael, a tall man with a comfortable look of middle age, and introduced herself as Barbara. She sat next to him on the couch, brushing the wrinkles from her dress as she moved effortlessly into the protective shelf of his arm. He settled himself into a large red chair that didn't seem to match the other furniture at all. He took a notepad from my pocket and licked the end of the pencil before beginning. "So what seems to be the problem?" he asked, favoring them with a warm smile. "Wait," Barbara said. "When I invited you in, you said the agency had sent over someone special. Does that mean you aren't a paranormal investigator?" she asked. She said it carefully, as though she thought he might be insulted by the question. He chuckled, getting this all the time. "The agency sent him, Barbara. I see no reason to," her husband began, but he put out a hand to stop him. "It's quite all right. No, ma'am, I'm not a paranormal investigator. My name is Killian Barker, and I'm what you'd call a paranormal facilitator." Michael crinkled his eyebrows. "Paranormal facilitator? What's that?" "Well, an investigator usually comes out to inspect the phenomenon and see if there's anything the agency can do for the client. Given the description your wife provided over the phone, though, I'd say we have enough data to go ahead and send out a facilitator such as myself." "But what does a facilitator do?" Barbara asked. "My training has allowed me to communicate with the presence or presences in your home and help you get rid of them." Michael seemed shocked. "You can speak to them?" he asked, and Killian couldn't help a little chuckle. "Not exactly. We can make our presence known and inform the entity that their continued inhabitation of this home is undesired. So tell me a little about what's been going on." And with that, he leaned back and lifted the notebook. Killian made notes as he listened, but it was a mechanical sort of dictation. These cases seemed to run along the same course most of the time. Furniture being moved, doors and containers left open, disembodied noises or voices in the house, and an otherworldly presence felt by all who inhabit the home. He listened politely, but was really looking for the ripples. Entities in the home don't appear as Barbara and Michael did. They seem to ripple in and out of existence like a stone making ripples in a pond when it impacts the water. As they spoke, Killian saw two entities moving about the house with a calm sort of familiarity. Both seemed to be adults. One a man who often moves between the kitchen and the back of the house, and a female that seems to flit about the kitchen like a hummingbird as she stopped and did something with objects Killian couldn't see. He thought she might also be on the phone with somebody, but all he could pick up from her wavy, ripply voice was a sense of pleasure about some new experience or event. Killian had scribbled down the words, "two-entity incursion," before Barbara reminded him that he wasn't alone. "Then there's the child sounds in our bedroom." That snapped Killian back. "Child sounds?" "Yes," said Michael. "We can hear a child talking and laughing and playing at odd times in our bedroom. One night it woke us up with a terrible wailing, and we spent the rest of the night in the living room with our door closed. Come morning, though, we went back and found the door wide open and the covers on our bed were a mess." Killian scratched out 2 and wrote 3 as he amended the notes to reflect the child's possible presence. "Very well then, I think I can help you, but it won't be easy. It sounds as though these entities have a certain amount of familiarity with the home, so we'll have to force them out." Barbara looked at Michael in confusion before looking back to Killian. "How do we do that?" "I don't think it will be too hard, but we may need to act quickly. I'll stay in your home tonight, if you allow me, and make notes on the situation. By tomorrow, I have little doubt that I'll have formed an attack plan to push these intruders from your home." That seemed to brighten them a little, and Barbara was happy to show him the guest room. It was a simple room, a bed, a wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto the backyard, but Killian didn't need much. He set his bag on the bed and began to compile the notes. This was far from his first encounter with the world beyond, and Killian had little doubt that he could help these clients. People tend to assign an almost magical quality to the other side. Still, for people like him, people who can see the ripples, it's easy to help people plagued by these entities. After an hour of collecting notes and making adjustments to them, Killian went out into the house to begin compiling further data. It was a very active day within the home. The sofa the couple had been sitting on earlier kept disappearing and reappearing outside on the curb. It was replaced by a red love seat, the same color as the chair he'd noticed earlier. No matter how many times Barbara and Michael took it out and brought their couch back in, it always reappeared on the curb. Finally, they stopped trying, and Barbara fell into despair as she flopped on the red couch. The couch was something they'd bought together after they'd married, and with Killian's help, they managed to move it to a side yard where it stayed put. The ripples continued to move through the house. The male moved about in a state of constant action, going from the living room to the kitchen and then to the back of the house with some rapidity. The female entity continued to move about the kitchen haphazardly, and then did the same around the living room for most of the afternoon. The child was not in evidence, but every now and again, Killian would hear a name called or catch a snatch of a song as someone sang or hummed. He followed them with his eyes as they went about their tasks, and even though Barbara and Michael couldn't see them, Killian was pretty sure they could feel them moving around their house. That night, the activity hit a crescendo. As they sat at the dinner table, a multitude of ethereal voices came rolling out of the living room like cathedral bells. Michael and Barbara whipped around to look at the noise, scared by the clatter in their living room. To Killian's eyes, it was as though 100 stones had been thrown at once, around the couch, around the TV, going towards the back, and slowly trickling into the kitchen. He could see not just the two forms, but the wavy outlines of many others. At first he thought there might be 5, but after a few minutes he decided it might be 10. Suddenly things began moving. Cabinets opened and closed at random. The fridge rattled under the mechanical rapidity of use. The TV blared, the microwave beeped, and all around them the ethereal voices talked and laughed. It was all Killian could do to herd Michael and Barbara into the guest room. "What is going on out there?" she cried. She and Michael huddled on the bed in terror, clutching each other for comfort. "It's never been that bad before." "This isn't the first time I've seen something like this," Killian confided, opening the door a little so I could peek out. "The presences are getting stronger. Before long, it will be impossible to get rid of them." Barbara collapsed into tears, and Michael held her as the din outside rose like an angry sea. Killian watched at the door, counting the swirls and seeing the indents left on the couch. One of the swirls actually wobbled towards him and threw the door open to the horror of Michael and Barbara. Killian heard a slurry voice whisper something about a bathroom before wandering off down the hall. Finally, around midnight, it seemed to settle down. Killian suggested they get some sleep while the presence was at rest. They moved like scared rabbits down the hall, eyes flickering every which way as they went. Killian watched them until the door closed and then began getting ready for sleep himself. He threw his suit jacket over the post and put his hat on top. He kicked his shoes off and lay in the comfortable embrace of the sheets as his eyes drifted towards sleep. It had been a long day, and he was ready for some sleep, if sleep would come. No sooner had he settled himself than an unearthly wail split the air. It was followed by both Michael and Barbara screaming his name, and he flew off the bed and out into the hall. He ran to their bedroom and saw 2 rippling forms standing on either side of the bed. He didn't have to ask if they could see them. The ripples were a steady wave of energy, and Killian could tell that they were seeing their intruders for the first time. "What's wrong, honey?" said the male presence. He was dressed in pajamas, and his hair was rumpled as though he too had been roused from sleep. The other figure was clearly the female, her robe pulled around her, and her long, straight hair swishing down her back. The two were on either side of the bed and seemed to be looking at something between Barbara and Michael. Suddenly, from the center of their bed, a voice of crystalline highness shivered across my ears. "I saw something. I don't know what it was." The female presence leaned down and nearly fell into Barbara. Barbara scuttled away from it, and Michael pulled her to him as he switched his gaze between the two apparitions. The female presence sat up suddenly, and in her arms was a shimmering child, a girl, Killian thought, who stared at the pair on the bed as though she could see them. As Barbara and the child made eye contact, I heard her scream in a fit of panic. Her shriek sent both of the wavering apparitions stumbling back a little and made the shimmering child loose a cry of her own. Get out of my house. I hate you. I wish you'd just leave me alone," Barbara screamed at the 3 of them. The rumpled man looked at the other, and both fled out into the hallway. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and Killian could hear it being locked behind them. Barbara shuddered in fear and rage and collapsed into Michael's arms, sobbing. He could commiserate with them. It was always hard when something you couldn't fight invaded your house, but they needed to be strong now. Killian told the two of them to secure their door and get some rest while he made plans for tomorrow. He knew there would be no sleep for him as he set about making a plan of attack for the next day. He set plans and counterplans that night, covering all his angles, and when dawn broke the next day, he was ready to help them. They sat in the living room, sipping coffee, and Killian could see the female presence pacing around the house, the child's presence not far behind her, and sometimes it would stop to glance at them on the couch as though it could see them. The male presence seemed to be absent for some reason, but Killian felt sure it would return later. The female talked to herself near continuously as the child sobbed and tugged at her. Killian tried to ignore them. Before the presences gathered together again, they needed a plan. You must summon all of your strength together and push them from the house, he told them as they sat on the red love seat that wasn't theirs. Barbara sobbed a little, her nerves frazzled. How? How do we do that? This house belongs to you two, not these things that have taken up residence here. You must focus your will and push them out before they become too strong. Summon up all your happy memories of this house, good times and bad times, and times that brought you closer, and form them in your mind. When the time comes, we'll draw strength from these things and use them to push these malicious presences out. So they spent the day gathering the memories that made the house a home for them. They talked about buying the house, raising their children, living, loving, and enjoying their lives. They cried a lot, and Killian felt like a voyeur as they wept in each other's arms on the lurid red sofa. As darkness gathered, Killian felt the male presence return and moved them to the guest room again so they could summon the last of their strength. He watched from the door as they all moved about the house. When all the presences gathered in the living room, he would be ready for them. Barbara wanted to act before they all returned, but Killian told them that this would only work if all of them were here to be forced out. They waited for nightfall. The presences had begun to gather in the living room. The ethereal sounds of their entertainment spilled into the guest room, but tonight the gathering was more intimate. It was just the three of them this time. No spectral legion like before, and Killian brought Barbara and Michael into the living room and stood them before the couch. Killian gave them a nod and turned off the lights in the living room. The effect on the presences was immediate. The male form, seated between the other two, looked around and brought both of the smaller forms closer to him. It was a protective gesture, but it mattered little. Now, Killian said. When he shouted, he saw all three stiffen in their seats. Take the hands of each other and cast these interlopers from your home. Michael reached for Barbara's hand, and she grasped it tightly. As they clasped hands, Killian could see a glow surrounding them as it had encircled the presences the night before. Both seemed to pulse with light, and the forms before them began to quiver as they saw them fully. Both Michael and Barbara shouted their ire, their contempt, their rage, and their sorrow to the intruders. At that moment, Killian saw them for who they really were. The waxy flesh of the recently deceased, the puffy, jaundiced skin of their faces, and the dark bruises beneath their eyes as their death masks were revealed. Asphyxiation, he thought, maybe a gas leak or something, but whatever the nature of their deaths, their ghostly visage caused an immediate reaction to the presence before them. "Get out of our house," they yelled, repeatedly, and Killian moved up behind them to add his strength to theirs. When he dropped his hands to their shoulders, he felt his own throat open again as Killian retook his true form. He'd known his death was coming in life, his killer's glee the last sound he'd ever heard as a mortal, but he knew from years beyond the pale that it was a grisly sight to behold. The screams of the intruders nearly dwarfed the otherworldly voices of Barbara and Michael. The two larger presences grabbed their child and fled the house. The ghostly trio stood silently as the sound of a car escaping split the night like a shrieking train. "We did it," Barbara said, both she and Michael now back to their initial selves. "They're gone. We have our house back," she cried, and both of them threw their arms around each other and laughed as they hugged and sobbed. "Yes, but I doubt it will be for long," Killian said, collecting his bag and preparing to leave. Both of them stopped their celebration to look at him. Killian took the opportunity to fish a pamphlet out of his bag. The living are never gone for very long, I'm afraid. In the light of day, they laugh off their fears and return to a place they now must call home. They chalk our presence up to a bit of bad dinner or a headache. As Scrooge put it, there's more of gravy than of grave about you. He handed them the pamphlet, and Barbara took it with a shaky hand. "I would suggest that you leave this place soon. If they believe what they saw here tonight, They may return with a religious or some other such person. They can banish you from this place, and believe me when I say that you would find the process very unpleasant. Leave? But where would we go? Onto the next plane of being? Heaven? Hell? Shangri-La? Doesn't matter to me, but this small victory won't last long. Stay if you like, it is ultimately your decision, but know that someday you will need to pass on. Better to pass peacefully than be swept out like old trash. He collected his hat and coat and shook their hands as he parted. If you need the agency's help again, don't hesitate to ask. We're always here if you need us. Killian opened the door and looked out into the inky blackness of the void. He had no idea what lay beyond. That's why the agency had been so keen to have him. Maybe these two could find some peace there. The living always wonder what comes after death. If they knew it was this, Killian doubts so many of them would seek it. Someone said the living often envy the dead. As a member of them, he could honestly say the grass wasn't much greener on the other side. And that's all I have for you guys today. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe so you know when I post next. Did you know that 75% of my viewers aren't subscribed? Crazy, right? I'll see you guys next time. Bye.